Good morning and welcome to our next web talk. My name is Matthew Karnichnik, and I'm here today to discuss 5G in Europe, the implications for Europe, with two very distinguished gentlemen who are experts in this field. First, I'd like to introduce Donald J. Rosenberg, who's the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Corporate Secretary at Qualcomm, Inc. in the United States. I also have with us today Thomas Schneider, who's the Managing Director of Research and Development at TRUMPF Machine Tools, the German machine tool maker. Mr. Rosenberg, I'd like to start with you. 5G is obviously a subject, as you know, that is being very closely looked at in Germany at the moment in terms of the security implications. What are your views of how this debate is going and where the focus has been in Germany so far?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this great discussion. It's a real privilege for me to do that. So on security, as we know, we're in the midst of both what people have called a trade war, or certainly trade disputes with China, and the creation of incredible new technologies. There has been a lot of talk about concern with respect to infrastructure of new networks, 5G networks, and existing networks for 4G. And as we all know, Huawei has been front and center there. The U.S., as we know, has taken some very strong measures to limit Huawei's continuing capabilities. And I know in Germany there's been some, I'd say, disagreement as to precisely how one should react to the potential for security concerns on the infrastructure networks. I think the balanced approach is certainly a good one. That is that we have to recognize the existing infrastructure, both for 4G and as 5G is built on top of that. There are certainly considerations as to capital expenditures, both previously made and needing to be made now. But there clearly are some potential security problems. And I think that the time is right for us to transition to an infrastructure that is more software-based, or I would say less dependent on a vertical structure that is one vendor supplying infrastructure capability. And we've all now heard, I think, about ORAN or Open RAN or virtual RAN, which I think would have been the direction whether or not there was security concerns. But what it does is it opens up that infrastructure to multiple vendors on the hardware level and also on the software level, so that there is not dependency on one supplier. But it also, I think, opens up capabilities and possibilities from a competition perspective, and from an innovation perspective that will in fact benefit the industry and consumers.
Well, let me come to you, Mr. Schneider, on this question, because you obviously are in the thick of the German debate, which is surrounding this question of whether or not Germany should let Huawei become a supplier in the country. And it seems that the government is now going to pursue a kind of middle course here by not banning Huawei 5G outright, but maybe placing fairly high hurdles before they can enter the market. Without getting into the particulars of that right now, why do you think, from your experience, is this technology so important for German industry?
So I think the German regulator has done a very unique job when they dedicated spectra to the industrial application on premise networks, as well as for the operation technology, as well as for the information and communication technology. So I think with this decision, Germany made everything right at this stage to gain momentum for this technology in the industry, and we need here for the campus networks a clear position to operate and to bring in applications. And that is for us a very challenging time, because we have to navigate through different providers of technology. But for us as an application-focused industry, it's more that we have a stability in the regulation and a clear forecast where we would go to bring our applications and our customers the benefits of this new technology. And that is clearly the focus of our research and also of our development, to bring the benefits to the customers, and building on an open infrastructure and clear regulations from the government.
Well, Mr. Rosenberg, you also spoke of the need for an open infrastructure, as it were, and focusing more on software going forward. Why then do you think people are so worried about Huawei's involvement in these networks? It's not just in Germany, it's all over Europe. The UK has decided not to go with Huawei, as the US has. Who's right here?
Well, I think the origins of the security concerns relate to the way infrastructure is today structured, which is, as I said, kind of one vendor vertical operation. So anyone, whether it's Huawei or Ericsson, Nokia or Samsung, who is the current supplier of a network for an operator, has pretty much complete control over that network. There is dependency on that vendor to add to the network, to modify the network, fix the network. And the goal and concept of an open architecture would be to limit dramatically any one vendor's ability to control, or in the case of security, interfere, interrupt, harm in any way the process of infrastructure communication, which is so fundamental. So that has been the concern, that any vendor with one who has complete control has the ability to do both good things and bad things, I suppose. So the notion is that when you separate it and you use, for example, basically standard server parts for hardware, new and different and competing software capability to implement the infrastructure engagement. There is no dependency on one particular vendor up and down the chain, and up and down the infrastructure chain, that is. And there are others who can supply alternatives at any given level of that infrastructure supply.
But what does that mean right now for the rollout of this technology? I think a lot of people are, somewhat confused about, how you would go about having this kind of hybrid infrastructure with some Huawei equipment and then using others. Isn't it easier and cheaper just to go with the Chinese supplier?
Well, if you're already an existing user of Huawei in your 4G network, for example, I think the argument is very strong that it would be cheaper, because what I think some people don't realize is the 5G network, at least in its initial stages, will be built on top of and use the 4G network. So with the enormous capital investment one has made in the 4G network, one would argue, at least from an economic perspective, that it might be cheaper and also less complicated to build on top of that, the 5G network. And that's a decent argument. The other thing, though, to keep in mind, I think, as part of this, is what I'm describing as the vRAN or Open RAN or virtual network is not something that can happen overnight. It's going to take a while for operators to be able to implement that approach, several years, as I understand it. So it's not going to be immediately a hybrid. I think in the very early stages, operators are going to have to make hard decisions about whether to use, for example, Huawei or Ericsson, Samsung, and then evolve with others into the virtual network, the open network. There are other players who are now very interested in networks that haven't been before. And those include cloud players, those include software developers, those include hardware developers, both from a server perspective, but also things like routers and the other pieces of the puzzle. And they are first working on how to put their pieces together into what ultimately will be that open architecture virtual network.
But Mr. Schneider, isn't this part of the problem here that over the years, a lot of companies haven't really been interested in network equipment anymore, and that the Chinese now are at the cutting edge of this technology and have left, much of the rest of the world behind? I mean, how competitive do you think Ericsson is, say, with Huawei when it comes to 5G network equipment?
So I cannot answer on the specific companies benchmarking the technology, but what we can see from the machinery industry, that in the past decade, everybody has decided to bring his own IoT device as a vertical integration, and some of us started to have their own cloud solutions, and in the last 2 and 3 years, we have seen in the area of machinery that for IoT connectivity, we need a standard, an open standard, and we formed UMATI, which is the language to connect machines vertically, because it's important that everybody shares the same openness, which allows the customer then to have better connected factories, because at the end, it's always the perspective of the customer, which makes a difference. And the second step, which we have seen, is on factory level, real-time location is one of the key enablers, and we formed together with some companies the open standard of OMLOCs, which is also open because it allows different applications on a shared infrastructure. And I think to make 5G a success, we need this openness too. And for sure, there are companies which are currently a little bit in the front. You mentioned the Chinese company, and others seem to be maybe behind, but if we agree on this strategic importance of the shared infrastructure, it's now the time to decide on this openness and to make sure that we could develop the future, especially of 5G and the future of for manufacturing, and the huge positive impact that could have on our industry, to form it together in an open way. It's, for me, it's the only way how we can make sure that digitalization comes to momentum and real traction on the shop floor, and that is where we are all looking for to bring our benefits to the customers.
Well,
Matthew, if I may
please.
just take issue with the premise of the question, or at least partly. I don't believe that Huawei is technologically superior to, for example, Ericsson. They have managed through a number of things, including some subsidization and their ability to price, to capture much of the market, so to speak, for infrastructure. But Ericsson is still, I think, as strong technologically, and we still have Nokia, Samsung, for example. So I don't think there is a gap in terms of the technological capability. It's more just the number of installations.
Well, at the same time, though, this equipment is being rolled out as we speak, and it does seem that overall the Chinese have their kind of nose ahead in this race. When do you think that we'll have clarity about where this is going and who is going to have the dominant technology? Or will it turn out, as you're saying, into this kind of, more open architecture, mixed picture where you have various players, bidding for projects?
So it will roll out over the next few years, whether it's 1, 2, 3, two to 3 years, I think, as all these players begin to and rapidly to engage. The capability exists already. In Japan, for example, Rakuten, with whom we work, produced an open RAN network. So it's quite something that will be implemented without a lot of difficulty, but it will take some time. And as I say, I think in the interim, operators will be using single vendors. But I know that, for example, in Germany and Europe, a couple of the operators have already decided to use, for example, Ericsson on a going forward basis 5G under the old infrastructure format until we get to a vRAN and Open RAN situation. So I think it's incorrect to assume that there will be a forced decision to stay with Huawei or to go with Huawei. I'm not suggesting that some operators will want to do that. But when you combine what I've described as the benefits of Open RAN with the security concerns that many have, it just adds impetus to the need to move more quickly with respect to getting to that Open RAN solution.
Mr. Schneider, as you mentioned, this technology is very important to businesses like yours, but could you tell us a little bit more about why that is? You mentioned the Internet of Things and all of the expectations that Mittelstand companies such as your own have for this technology. Where is this going to lead? Where is this technology going to lead German industry in the best case scenario in the coming years?
I think the interesting thing of 5G is it's on top of the current brownfield infrastructure, and it gives us new opportunities of data consistencies from the sensor to the final end customer application. And that is I think, something unique, so it can be easily installed on the existing environment in the campus networks and brings new insights in structuring manufacturing processes. As I mentioned, there's ultra-wideband technology for indoor location, but 5G can also allow to integrate these information in a separate layer and go campus to campus communication. So I think the transformation, the digital transformation, could be speed up with 5G in parallel to the existing infrastructure. And so I would say the lighthouses of these campus infrastructures could enable different parties from the industry to join and to move together in this direction, and then the multi-vendor obligation will come by itself, because if more and more people are setting up these kind of networks and campus setups, multiple vendors will be decided to be in the installation lead. So I think it's a good time and to make this movement, and the architecture of 5G and the multi-layer and the data consistency is this uniqueness which now allows us to set up good applications and good use cases.
Well, speaking of good use cases, Mr. Rosenberg, just quickly, you mentioned Japan before as being, a place where this has already been installed and is already being used by industry. What are do you think, the models right now in terms of the industry applications of 5G?
Yeah, it's so a very important question, and to relate it to the first part of it, the first vRAN or Open RAN networks will most likely be private networks, as we call them, used by industry, as opposed to the more public, broader networks that we all think about and use. And the capability that 5G provides, 5G in particular provides, to move to this opportunity for industrial networks is really, really important. Qualcomm, for example, is working very closely with Bosch and Siemens in Nuremberg right now to create what will be, I think, the world's first 5G standalone network in an industrial environment. And what does that mean? It means that the manufacturer can have its own private network, which will be faster, will be more efficient, will be more focused on its needs, and very importantly, will support privacy and security in ways that hasn't been emphasized in the past, because it will be a contained private network, contained as much as the particular company or industry wants to contain it, and manage it that way. There are other great capabilities if we get to in 5G, which will also support concepts of security and privacy, which will be very important as we move forward.
Well, Mr. Schneider, these campus networks are also something that are being hotly discussed in Germany. You just mentioned them. What role is the regulator playing here in sort of accelerating this process, or putting roadblocks up? How easy is it in Germany to establish a network like this at this stage?
So I think the process of implementing bandwidth for dedicated private networks is unique, and it's accepted from the global community that German has found their very good way to manage this. So I think it's from the regulatory side, it was a good decision. Currently, the first lighthouse projects, like Don mentioned, are taking their place. Tomorrow there will be an opening campus in 5G in the northern Black Forest area with the University of Stuttgart, Fraunhofer, and some of the big players there, where we have an opening too for a campus network for research. So I think it's now starting, and we have to bring the youth for the customer there. And just to mention, one of the things which are very important for manufacturing industry is because of the security aspect mentioned before, we can do there things which are currently not possible. For example, real-time optimization of material flows with the data in a consistency and in a real-time bandwidth, video connected to sensor information, these sensor joint of sensor signals to allow very good decisions is something which is what was not possible before 5G, or it will allow us to do anti-collision AGV management within factory environments. So there are use cases which can be enabled in these private networks which have just not been possible with Wi-Fi, with Bluetooth, and it's a sensor fusion which, from my perspective, is something which is driving new ideas, new products down to the shop floor, and therefore allowing us in the industry to grow with new products. And that is something which is, at the end, then also empowering that investments in infrastructures are done. So if there are products and if there's a need for the end customer.
Mr. Rosenberg, despite all of the promise of this technology, which Mr. Schneider has just described, there is still a lot of focus on the security implications. As we've already discussed, there's a lot of worry about it, both in these closed networks for industrial purposes, as well as in the larger public networks, which were starting to come online slowly. What is the worst case scenario here in terms of the kind of 5G landscape if we get this wrong? What is the worst thing that could happen?
Well, I don't think the worst case scenario is unique to 5G. It exists today, it's existed in the past, and it will exist in the future. And that is basically what I alluded to earlier, which is not just concerns I know that we all have about cyber attacks and how we can use it, but basically control of an infrastructure, control of, for example, the grid, those kinds of things. But I think, in fact, 5G, in addition to its great evolution, technical evolution, is in fact a much more secure, much more capable of providing security than in the past. We at Qualcomm, as you know, design and develop the fundamental technology, which others then use and implement, But as part of our design philosophy, we have designed in security features and other things that can be used to enhance security and privacy. The other thing about 5G, I just want to throw in, because we're talking a lot, I know, at this conference about digital autonomy and sovereignty. It's a perfect time for Europe to be able to exploit 5G capabilities, similar to what Tom has said. For example, the low latency and fast speeds of 5G will support those things. And the things I've talked about in terms of private networks, there are just wonderful capabilities. And what better time than this crisis that we're in, where it's a perfect example of where challenges identify lots of opportunities. And the fact that 5G is here, starting in its nascency now, is really a wonderful confluence of events, which we can all take advantage of as we realize we are going to be more and more dependent on communications capabilities, IoT, for example, as mentioned, as well as the traditional access to the internet, broadband, data. It'll play into the increased use of AI. I mean, there's just enormous amounts of capability and things that we haven't even thought of today that people will employ the 5G technology to enhance our lives and to deal with the potential for the next crisis, whether it's pandemic-like or something else. And I'd say one other thing: Europe's focus on autonomy, the focus on concern about the supply chain, is also very timely. And it's also timely that they can use 5G, these things we've talked about, to anticipate future problems and take the lead in certain areas in the supply chain or elsewhere. So I think it's a great moment, despite all the difficulties we're all facing.
Well, speaking of the difficulties, Mr. Schneider, one of the difficulties is that a lot of countries do not have the resources that they did pre-corona. A lot of companies don't either. Are you seeing continued interest in Germany in particular, but in other parts of Europe as well, in investing in this type of technology, or are you seeing people draw back a little bit as a result of corona?
So I think there are two things. The crisis has shown us how important digital solutions are and how important we are on the way to drive our capabilities towards autonomous manufacturing, at least for a certain time period, to make sure that our supply chains remain open and we produce further. So I think there is a challenge to bring all our customers and our companies by ourselves in the investment period again. And I think we need, like this day today, a strong sign from the government, a strong sign from the community of industry that it's now the perfect time for investments for the future. And 5G is an opportunity to bring back our expertise in the domain, for example, in machinery, where Europe plays a very strong role. Overall, with integrating this new technology, we can bring us back on the front row or in the driver's seat, because at the end, the management of our domain expertise, powered by the technology of 5G, enabling machine learning and other things based on the data we provide out of our machines. So for me, it's a challenge. We have to convince ourselves, our partners, and our customers to invest, but it's the right timing, as Don said, for Europe to invest in the future of our products, and I think we are very well prepared. And now we have to decide that we would like to drive this digital journey of transformation into a new technology.
I think we'll soon
to decide it.
Exactly. I think we'll soon know the answer to that question. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. It's been an interesting conversation, and thank you for tuning in this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Hello to
Thank
everyone.
you for being invited, and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Vielen Dank, auf Wiedersehen.
Tschüss, ne? Kann man einfach rausmachen. Ciao.